What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and it's time for the League of Legends patch 11.7 rundown. And I'm actually pretty happy about this patch. There's a lot of good hits to pro play, there's a lot of good hits to solo queue. Some of those are the same changes. And also, just in other sort of Riot Games news, there's a patch that I've been looking forward to for a while for Legends of Runeterra, which heavily amplifies the PvE mode that I've been enjoying in the lab. So, quick playruneterra.com if you want to play some LOR. I think that game is outstanding. Anyway, let's get into this patch. I think it's really cool. So, bam. Patch highlights nerfs to Alistar from pro play, Hecarim from pro and elite play. To be fair, OP in every elo. Ivern because of skilled win rate, Kai'Sa because of pro presence, Rel, Thresh, Udyr, and Tristana, all from pro presence. Fair enough, it's a pro-focused patch. Now, I want to point out, in general, that Riot always has to be at least a full patch behind. So, for example, I'm using 11.5 presence data for the, data in this for pro presence. I just said the same sentence twice. Cool. Because ultimately 11.6 for pro started 4 days ago, which was the weekend, which means there's no realistic way for Riot to make any changes based on that information. Now they can go and look at last week's 11.6 games and start planning 11.8 as a result to see what changes they put in 11.6 that might have worked. It means they probably won't re-nerf Alistar or Kai'Sa or anything, but maybe something else. Now, of note, Hecarim did in fact get nerfed in 11.6 himself. Was still far too good in 11.7. I think they basically said, okay, we're going to nerf Hecarim Q, and then saw that the solo Q win rate data didn't change by enough, and they're like, we expect this nerf to be, maybe they expected a 2% win rate nerf, and it was only 1% win rate nerf. So they said, okay, we need another 1% win rate to go in then. And I think that makes sense. So there's that little bit. And then, of course, buffs are... I guess they can be informed by pro play. For virtually all these champs, they have no pro presence at all. Ashe has a little bit, Varus has a little bit, but it's champs that are, doing a bit under what they should be. And in some cases, they are trying to find buffs that are, that can help with like low to high elo to pro skew, which is an interesting topic and one that I want to cover at some point. It's one of the sort of video ideas floating around in my head, is trying to sort of chart out pro presence versus low and high elo and like ways you can kind of suss out that information. It'll be an interesting topic one day. I have ideas of how to tackle it. It's not going to be perfect, but I think it'll be interesting all the same. And then changes to Essence Reaver, Lord Dominic, Cyril, Turbo Chem Tank, Everfrost, and Trinity Force, as well as a bunch of skins. Alrighty, so let's get into it. So Alistar is being nerfed again because of pro. Actually, to be honest, I wouldn't have minded them finding a way to include this information, the because of pro or not, somewhere here as well. Even just calling it like being obvious that they expect it to be a nerf or a buff. I think that would be interesting here. So I don't know how you would solve that easily. It'd be more custom graphical work, which the people who do patch notes don't do just patch notes, as far as I know. So, that cuts into their ability to do other things, but whatever. Either way, Alistar is getting nerfed. 0 to 20 damage off the Q, and a flat 15 damage off the trample auto attack. So, Alistar maxes Q first, as far as I could tell, looking at data. So you're going to feel this pretty quickly. Obviously, you're actually 1, 2, 3 in QWE, but, from here onwards, it's actually going to be accurate to the graph, or the data table. And yeah, it's 20 damage down eventually on the all-in potential. It's minor, but if Alistar is less able to finish all-ins, then fair enough. For what it's worth, his win rate is slightly below average in solo queue, and his pro presence is 78%. So, yeah, pretty much hitting the pro nerf threshold, understandable there. As far as the E auto attack damage, this is including his total attack damage on top of the E smack. Now, there is some, like, tremor damage that goes in before the E hits. That's not being included here, because ultimately, that's not as necessarily reliable. But the smack does a bit less damage. So yeah, this will nerf him down. This should drop Alistar a peg down. There's actually several support nerfs in this patch. Rel and Thresh are also getting hit, so should check out the support meta a fair bit. But it also means that all those champs are going to be a bit weak in solo queue for the most part. So next up are buffs to Amumu, who is doing almost 1% win rate sub, below average for solo queue. 0 pro presence, unsurprisingly. Amumu is losing or getting a 20 mana buff on the Q and a 1-second cooldown buff on Tantrum. And this is the big buff in my opinion. So I know that some of the context, right? So it's like Mummy's not doing very well, especially in skilled and elite. So they're trying to find buffs that are skewed towards higher elo, right? Because he's actually fine for like gold minus, but he's not doing very well for plat plus. And he's one of the few champions where the win rate actually decays as you gain elo. Because normally, like if you do like public data collection, in a lot of cases, you will have like an inflationary win rate with elo because like challenger players win more than half their games. So if you're looking at challenger players, every champ they play has an above 50% win rate, because otherwise they wouldn't be challenger, right? Like there's that little bit of chicken and egg like causing win rate stuff going on, and that trickles down to a certain degree, right? As long as you're an above average elo, your win rate tends to be above 50%, and so the champs you play tend to be above 50%, right? And that exacerbates the higher elo you go. Again, challenger players have higher win rates than plat players, generally speaking, right? Look at the top 10 of challenger; everyone has like a 70% win rate. It's absurd. Anyway, this is to say, it's very hard to find a champion whose win rate goes down with elo, assuming you're just kind of pegging your win rates in that regard. You're not normalizing them in some way. And most public sites don't normalize them. Amumu's win rate goes down with elo, despite not being normalized against win rate. So it's actually super tragic. It's very, very bad. It was also interesting because I looked into this. If you are like plat or lower, Emax into Wmax is his best build by like a couple percent win rate. It's like you should very obviously build like a fairly damaging Amumu and leave Q as a 1-point wonder. And this is even if you look at like Plat Plus in terms of every player above Platinum 4. What's interesting is if you switch to Diamond Plus, if you cut out the Plat games but keep all the Diamond, Masters, etc. players, the win rate data flips, and Qmax second is now the more successful play rate. And this includes like Diamond 4 players, which is like about my skill level, which is like still not that good. It's still, top 3% or whatever, but like suddenly, actually, whether it's because higher elo players land Q more often, or they need the cooldown more frequently, or he just can't be as much of a fighter, or whatever it is, it's just very interesting seeing those kinds of changes. I just thought that was kind of interesting as I was doing research for this patch rundown. Either way, yeah, Amumu, not doing so hot and anything kind of above the, maybe 30%, 25% mark. Okay, 20 men off Q. 1 second off the equal, that was a very, very big deal. I expected Mumu to be very, very strong in maybe everything sub Diamond and maybe even everything sub Master. 1 second cooldown off of Tantrum is a very, very big deal. Because keep in mind, this is not just 1 second off of a 10-second cooldown, aka a 10% DPS increase. Mumu gets cooldown back when he takes damage, which means this is really like kind of a 5-second cooldown becomes a 4-second cooldown, or a 6-second cooldown, a 4-second cooldown becomes a 3.5 cooldown. Like, it's a really, really, really big deal. And this is a huge DPS increase. It is a huge clear speed increase. It can help his PvP combat, of course, as well, but it's even more so for his jungle clear. This probably gets moved to the point where he can comfortably clear 6 camps and then be ready for Scuttle in time, which is a really, really, really big deal. So we might see some, truly phenomenal gains here on this champion. I'm curious if there are like jungle path optimizations that could be had, but I mean, we should be in a very good spot post-patch. Here's the data table, by the way. The mana cost on Q down by 20 is pretty obvious to look at. The equal, and again, very, very meaningful. So really important there. Ashe, for what it's worth, is actually above baseline win rate for Plat Plus to the tune of about 0.8%. So she's actually doing pretty well. Ashe appears to be a fairly successful champion, has 1% pro presence. Thankfully, the buff is very, very small. It's 0, 10, 20 seconds off the ult cooldown. This has the sort of side, I don't know if you want to call it benefit, but it buffs AD carry Ashe more than it buffs support Ashe if you were someone who wanted to play that. If you did like a flatter buff, like it's a flat 80 seconds or something, that would buff support Ashe more. Either way, yeah, I mean, this is, again, a pretty small change. Ashe very often builds things like Essence Reaver, so she's pretty often going to have a sort of percent lower cooldown regardless. That doesn't really affect how much of this buff matters, but it means you're going to have a lot more arrows, especially, from level 11 onwards. Keep in mind, right, this doesn't do literally anything until 11. So this is, again, a very, very, very small buff. I assume it's like, hey, maybe we can get some more AD carry variation in pro play. We have room to buff Ashe because she's like sub 1% above baseline. So, why not throw it in there? This does not feel like the Caitlyn buffs from a while back where I like really felt bad about it. And I was like, Caitlyn's already fine. Don't do this. This is such a small buff. I don't really care. This could still have the same effect that we had with Caitlyn, where it's like you can then nerf the champion below what she was before and still see pro presence. There is a chance pros look at this and go, oh yeah, maybe we'll play Ashe since Kai'Sa's getting nerfed again. There's a chance. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's an outside possibility. Braum is getting buffed 2 seconds on the E, and 0, 1/4, and ½ second on the first target hit by R. My understanding, the way Braum R works is you get the full duration knockup on the first target hit, and then a measly like 1/4 second on everybody else. And I believe that knockup duration also scales with distance, if I have that right. It's been a while since I have read Braum's tooltips, really seen him in game, so sorry if that's wrong. I know I could have looked it up, but of course you can too. Either way, you can still just compare apples to apples here, no problem. And 2 seconds off for Unbreakable can be pretty nice. So here we go. Here's Braum's E cooldown and the R knockup duration. He is in fact, a solid 0.6% below baseline, 1% pro presence. Like, yeah, has room to be nerfed. And the E cooldown, it's not gigantic. Like, obviously, it is going to matter some. Like, getting to get his E back up, from 10 to 8 seconds in a team fight is going to matter. There are going to be situations where he lives as a result. This is probably a solid 1% or so win rate bump, especially when you count this one as well. Braum should be in a pretty good spot post-patch, right? Like, this is definitely a champ who should be completely viable for solo queue. With there being 3 different support nerfs in the patch, there's a good chance Braum sees some pro presence as well, especially since hyper carries are still a thing, right? Jinx is definitely getting some play. Aphelios is getting some play. So we could really see that kind of come out here. It's definitely a possibility. Hecarim getting further nerfed. So now we're at a point where we have definitively nerfed Hecarim E below where it was first buffed. Certainly Hecarim has been it feels like a big winner of the support item, not support item, sorry, but the jungle item changes and the overall like fighter/tank item changes. Turbo Chem Tank Hecarim is his best build by far. It has overtaken fighter Hecarim by quite a bit. So, yeah, okay, he was a winner of preseason, but also a winner of the fact that he already skipped going warrior because he wanted to finish a, Trinity Force or whatever early. And so the fact that he still gets blue or red smite, despite, like, before the old version of Hecarim either had to, like, spend 650 to get blue or red smite and then build Triforce, or not get a PvP smite and build Triforce first, right? Now Hecarim gets to build his mythic first, and not have to pay the tax for a smite, whereas someone like Lee Sin, like, finished warrior, right? That kind of systems level change where like old Hecarim didn't used to get a smite, and now does, like, is actually pretty meaningful. So yep, the E is now nerfed below what it was before. There are also nerfs to Turbo Chem Tank's move speed, so Hecarim is going to be a lot less rapid as he runs around the map. What I found interesting with Hecarim, so his run rate, by the way, is like 3% over baseline. His pro presence is 98% in 11.5. It's like very obviously the right ban. He's like a 59% ban rate. It's like really, really absurd. Like Hecarim is the absolute like poster child for nerf this champion ASAP. Now what I found interesting was I was curious, how has Hecarim's pro presence changed over time? So I went and looked at top regions, LCS plus. And said, looked at what was Hecarim's pro presence on each patch. So in 11.1, it was 14%. In 11.2, it was 9%, which was the patch where they buffed Turbo Chem Tank. So it actually went down in the Turbo Chem Tank patch when it was now the optimal build. It then went to 31% in 11.3. It then finally went to 72% in 11.4. So the patch came out in 11.2, and to be fair, I know Udyr was stronger before, but Udyr was permabanned, right? And you still needed a second jungler in every game, which means, okay, sure, Pantheon was also out there, right? So like Udyr and Pantheon were there, but keep in mind, those champs were getting permabanned. So like there was a lot of room to put Hecarim in your list. Lilia was the obvious number 3 jungler, despite the fact that fast forward to today, and Hecarim is clearly heads and shoulders above Lilia, right? So you can say like, oh, the metagame changed. Like, no, the other champs didn't move at all, really, right? Like, Nara's getting played the whole time. Like, the mid lane pool hasn't changed at all. The bot lane pool and support pool hasn't changed at all. Like, the entire year in pro play so far, Hecarim has been with and against the same champs this entire year. And yet, for the first month of pro play, his presence was 14 and then 9%, and the next 2 weeks was 31%, which is still criminally too low. Only a month ago, in 11.4, did pros finally en masse in the top regions in the world finally realized with 70% presence, oh, maybe Hecarim might be the best jungler in the game. And then, lo and behold, by 11.5, people realized, like, oh no, he's actually the best champion in the game. And that's, again, a whole month and a half after Chemtank got buffed. So I want this to be a point that, look, pros often get there eventually, but you can't be like, look at the pro pick rate, this champ's not busted, when the most busted Hecarim had a 9% pro presence. Pros are not always right. Sometimes they get there, sometimes they don't, but pros are not always right. Anyway, I wanted that rant to be there because I had like very obvious examples of what was happening, and it's like, look, we can't just look at pro presence because sometimes things are over and undervalued, and there's an absurdly good pick out there that no one's considering yet, but they should be, and eventually, sometimes they do. Alrighty, so devastating charge getting nerfed to 10%. Cool. Yep. Pretty small buff again, nerf obviously despite our distance to 11.6. Yep, still huge. So obviously a lot of puns, which is nice. Good job. But yep, with this in Chem Tank, I expect Hecarim to still be above baseline win rate. I expect Hecarim to still be on the strong side. Now, he's not going to be the best champion in the game anymore, but I expect Hecarim to still be a top 4 jungler. Just not a permaban. And actually, to be fair, in pro play, Hecarim had exactly the same number of picks and bans at 11.5. It was like 78 to 78 in top 4 regions. So I just found that kind of interesting. Either way, still completely viable. There's no way Hecarim is dead with this change. Next up is Ivern, and Ivern does not have any pro presence at all. At 11.5, it was 0%, but is 2.5% win rate above baseline. Definitely doing very, very well. Emax first is like the 93% pick rate build. People have realized, yes, indeed, you max Trigger Seed. It's like correct by win rate by a ton. This is obviously like the right build. And so, yeah, Trigger Seed's damage is going down absurdly low. I mean, very rarely do you see an ability go 70 to 150. Obviously, the primary thing you care about with Ivern is the shielding power itself. So the slow is kind of the primary benefit here. The damage is more like a nice to have. But yeah, you indeed max E first. So here's your E damage table. You'll feel it somewhat. Like, this does have an impact. It's 20 damage down. It's gonna matter. Good change. Should still be pretty solid, honestly. Of note, Ivern's win rate is like slightly below Hecarim's. I would argue Ivern's nerf is, well, considering Chem Tank's getting changed as well, and I would argue it's a nerf. This is probably a bigger nerf to Hecarim than Ivern, so sure. Next up is Kai'Sa. Even though Kai'Sa got nerfed a while back with her Q damage going down by 0 to 10, and basically it was, they targeted a nerf that was actually really well aimed. They got Kai'Sa to basically exactly a fair win rate in solo queue. She's within like literally 0.1 or 0.2% of the baseline win rate of her MMR in public data. So the nerf was targeted very, very well, size-wise. However, in pro play, they're like, nah, Kai'Sa's the best. And to be fair, Kai'Sa is gonna benefit from coordination, right? The fact that you can set up CC in the backline and have Kai'Sa dive in, the fact that she can be a little bit late to the fight by pushing in a wave and then join in time. There's definitely a fair bit of like skilled play skew to Kai'Sa that I totally get. And so they're nerfing, which I think is actually pretty fair, they're nerfing the skilled play skewed ability. That the ult is kind of why Kai'Sa is so good in pro play. Because of her ability to follow up on CC and finish off fights and make sure you get a little bit more done there. Yeah, solo queue is really chaotic and whatnot, but kind of the nice thing about a nerf like this is in a lot of times solo queue is, well, here's the weird thing. Okay, I'm of two minds about this actually, because I can see it going either way. So there is such a thing as a long enough cooldown or a further cooldown nerf won't really hurt solo queue that much, right? So solo queue is super, super chaotic, right? There are fights all the time. People aren't playing safely around objectives. People just like face check a brush and die, even though Dragon's coming up in 10 seconds. They have no reason to be there. Like, dumb things will happen in solo queue. And so like you kind of want short cooldowns to be ready all the time, because something dumb's going to happen and you want to be there to punish the Karma who face checked or the, whatever. In pro play, a 2-minute cooldown and a 90-second cooldown are in a lot of cases really the same, because like you do dragon and then you chill and then wait for the next dragon fight. Like that happens sometimes in pro. But so there's like, I guess in my mind there's like breakpoints, right? So like I thought Gale Force was actually well sized to where 60 becoming 90 is enough to really change solo queue. Right? Like Gale Force at 60 seconds was up all the time for any play in solo queue every time. But 90, it's like, actually, I Gale Forced to run away, and then I recalled and got back on the map, and a fight started, and Gale Force wasn't back up yet. Like, that happens to me constantly in my, like, I have like 100 and something flex queue games already right now this season, because I'm playing with friends a whole bunch, and we average, like, our elo averages out to, like, low plat to like maybe high gold based on who we're playing with, and it's like, look, it's so chaotic. I actually could use a 40-second Gale Force cooldown reliably. And so like that's kind of the cooldown breakpoint that it feels to me for the games that I am playing this season in solo queue. In pro play, that gets stretched a little bit to where basically the TLDR, I'm spending a lot of time on this one, is 110 becoming 130 is often just like, it's not up for solo queue anyway, but in pro play, you just start to hit the part of the game where like, actually sometimes, you could have used it in time. I'm going to say ultimately, look, what it's going to do, it's going to nerf solo queue in it a little bit. It's probably honestly not going to do enough to change pro play presence. Like the fact that there are Varus buffs and Ashe buffs are really the primary things that are going to maybe change the bot lane meta around a little bit. And the fact that engaged tanks are getting nerfed as well with Alistar and Rel and Thresh all getting hit. That like maybe, just maybe, you're not going to play Kai'Sa as the like tank engaged follow-up champion. But realistically, I don't see Kai'Sa losing her top spot based on this change because ultimately, I don't think it's a big enough change. I do think this is a chance. There is a chance this change is a little bit pro play skewed, but not by a ton. And anyway, here's the change. Again, nerf for the first 15 levels of the game, which is like virtually all of the game. So like she is objectively weaker. Don't get me wrong. It's a nerf to both pro and solo queue and all elos, but I think she's still gonna get picked in pro like all the time. All right, move on. Kindred is getting a 0.1 bonus AD ratio on the Q, and they're also getting 2 seconds off the E cooldown. And Kindred is in fact not doing very well. So Kindred is like a solid 2% win rate below expectation, has a 2% pro presence, so like very, very little play overall. And so here is a data table of Kindred's Q damage. So basically, I'm saying since it's a bonus AD ratio change, let's just include the base damage of the Q, and let's pretend Kindred is gaining 7% bonus AD per level, which means like at level 1, you're running like a stat shard and like absolute focus. At level 4 with 21 bonus AD, let's say you recalled off of a 5 or 6 or 7 camp clear and you picked up double longsword. Is that kind of the realistic recall? No, not really, but whatever. And then like around level 10, which is like 70 bonus AD, you finish Kraken Slayer. So like these breakpoints are like about correct. Like these are about right in terms of where the damage is actually going to line up. And then it's probably kind of falling off from here on because like this is probably when your Essence Reaver or whatever comes in, or maybe a Phantom Dancer, which to be fair in 3 levels is plus 21 AD, which is actually not that bad. But at level 18, that's so late, you probably got more than, plus 130 attack damage, whatever the number actually is. So like eventually these numbers don't quite line up, but this is like reasonably accurate to what an actual game looks like for Kindred. If you're running Conqueror, there's even more going on, right? It goes even higher, but you're seeing, yeah, Q does 1 to 2 to eventually 4 to 5% more damage. That's, not horrible. 5 damage on my mid-game Q with a Noon Quiver. Sure, okay. It's something. Why not? The E cooldown, obviously, this is an ability you would max last. It's not close. You definitely max it last. Thankfully, the 2-second cooldown is flat and, pretty good at all points of time. Technically, yeah, 12 becoming 10 is a bigger deal than 16 becoming 14. But I'm glad we're not having this like, and I tend to just really dislike it. This like, oh, well, it's going to be 16 and then 15.5 and then 14 and then 13.5 and then 12. I actually really hate that. I don't know. It just feels so, I know there can be a real time and place for half-second cooldown changes and things like, Xin Zhao Q actually makes sense. But when your cooldown is like 14 seconds, you don't need half-second cooldown increments. You just don't. Like, make it flat or just do 1 per second. Like, 1 per level. It's okay. So I'm glad this is actually a full, like, here's a flat 2-second cooldown, buff. We're there. Good job. Pretty meaningful, honestly. Again, this will help the jungle clear a little bit because of runes. This will help the jungle clear because of your E being up for, like, maybe 2 tries on red buff. Or, like, it's up for red buff and then immediately up for big Krug. Like, this can matter. So good to see the change. Should be a pretty nominal buff. Kindred should be in a more balanced spot. I wouldn't put Kindred at like a strong, like on the OP side, but like should be reasonable and needs the help. So I think it's a good change. Next up is Lissandra getting 10 flat damage on the Q. Lissandra's actually doing pretty well in solo Q. About 0.5% above baseline. So honestly, a totally reasonable champion choice overall. Here is the Q damage going up by a flat 10. Is going to affect wave clear, is going to affect PvP damage. The base cooldown on this ability is very, very short at max rank. So you're really going to feel the DPS gains here. Lissandra should realistically be in pro play as a result of this change. I don't really know her matchup table, so I don't know like what champ she's a counter pick to. She's probably not a like first pick blind, but Lissandra is definitely viable for pro play at this point. Lissandra is a good mid laner. If you want some elo and you like some Lissandra, if you need some more engagement from the team, I think go for it. Lissandra should be in a good spot. My Clash team's mid laner plays some Lissandra. And I'm going to, try to get us some games on list to get some reps in because I think this is a great champ and should look really good. All right. Mordekaiser, honestly, doing also fine in solo queue as far as I can say. Despite the buffs of 11.3, they're still saying Mord is slightly on the weaker side, namely his upfront damage and sustain, more power to obliterate his foes. So as far as I can see from solo queue win rate, he is just barely on the plus side of balanced. So I don't think he objectively needs buffs. Mordekaiser may be a champion who like is allowed to sit above 50 because his champs like Akali who need to sit below 50 to feel fair for other league players because like they are frustrating. And so, if they're actually balanced for like the average player playing them, people just like really dislike playing the game. And having the promise that if you put in the reps, you can get there can be fine. Mordekaiser, I think, is probably fairly easy to play. I think his skill curve is a bit flat. I would guess so anyway, just because I think he's pretty straightforward. And so ultimately, maybe he just gets to sit slightly above 50, and that's okay. I don't know. I'm just speculating. This is the kind of champ that I feel like would be reasonable to sit above 50. But yeah, Mordekaiser is totally reasonable champion. This is a pretty small buff, to be fair, but here is the total isolated Q damage. It's basically a flat 7-ish% damage increase. That's just how the math works out, of gaining an additive 10% damage increase off of a 30% damage bump. But I mean, his ISO Q clearly does very, very good damage. Rank 9 abilities, do about, or level 9, rank 5 abilities deal about 300 damage. Like this is like about a reasonable damage number, like to be really fair. Obviously the baseline damage at 18 is really outstanding, so you really can't complain about this one. I mean, it's like a bit high, right? But like 300 is not like unheard of for, asking for special considerations like solo hitting and, kind of a long wind up and a dodgeable skill. So whatever. Yeah, again, Mordekaiser already being in a decent spot should be a very, very solid champion. Mordekaiser's a great pick. If you like some top lane, play some Mordekaiser. He's generally a pretty decent anti-tank, so there's a chance that Riot wants him in a pro play as well, which I think is totally reasonable. Yeah, should be playable. Next up is Rel. Rel is getting nerfed like most of the champions in this patch. He's getting nerfed because of pro play. So a full quarter second pulled off of the E stun. Fair enough. I will say, having played Rel only about twice and being very bad at the champion, landing the E stun is sometimes difficult for bad Rel players, which, as only playing 1 or 2 games, I am a bad Rel player. So this has a nice benefit of, if you're bad at Rel, you won't feel this nerf as much, which, I'll be honest, I'm okay with. In general, I'm okay with overall flattening champions very slightly. I don't want to go too hard, obviously. I don't know if Rel's actually a flatter champion than most, from like a champion mastery perspective. I don't actually know, but as someone who likes to play Phil and likes to play different champions, I like, a champion being balanced around noobs like me who don't know the champ very well. I played some Aatrox yesterday, while Mastery 2 on new Aatrox. It was bad. My first Q was to last in a minion, and I was short by 100 units, and I'm sure my opponent just like emoted at me like, well, this guy's trash. So, I don't mind that kind of stuff as a champion variety enjoyer. I'm the right side of that meme, and there's the one trick enthusiast and the variety enjoyer over here, and I'm the good side of the meme. Okay, let's move on. Honestly, yeah, pretty sizable nerf on the Rel. Is below 50% in solo queue, or sorry, below baseline in solo queue. Ban rate's a pretty nominal 15 to 20%, so not absurd, but the pro presence at 81% puts her, I believe, second place of all supports. So, okay, reasonably deserved nerf, sure enough. Next up, we have Teemo. I am also, by the way, a Teemo enjoyer. It's outstanding. I love Teemo. He's such a great champion. So, an increase to the attack speed buff from Guerrilla Warfare. Cool stuff. That's always nice to see. You can find some real good DPS gains there sometime. And then Toxic Shot, just getting a flat 1 to 5 base damage on the auto attack. Teemo is a solid 0.5% below baseline. I mean, Teemo in general, by the way, is straight up a counterpick champion. If you blind Teemo, there are some really, really bad matchups there that will absolutely wreck you, and it sucks. There are also some really absurd matchups that Teemo can't lose. I played Teemo last night into a Camille. For 3 straight trades, I queued a minion when Camille jumped on me, and I still won the lane by a lot. It was dumb. This Teemo is outstanding in counterpick situations. I don't know. Teemo is so sharp on matchups that like I don't even know if buffing Teemo does much. Because ultimately, like, you just can't blind the champ like this. Ironic because he has a blind. But you know, it's really like you can't blind against Teemo because he'll blind you. And hey, here's what happens. You know, as a Teemo enjoyer, happy with Teemo buffs. Ultimately, yeah, pretty solid champion. I will say that this buffs the like on-hit attack speed tank builds more. I know they're not common for him at all anymore at all. But you know, AP Teemo uses this less. So here is the total on-hit damage of his base AD plus the E, which you max first, and it's not big, right? It'll slightly help last hitting. You do get some damage to your opponents, but you know, your auto attack damage is 155, counting the E at level 18. Going up by 5 is something, right? Like, this isn't the worst thing ever. I mean, if we see Marksman gain, you know, what is it, like 0.3 AD growth or 0.4 AD growth, like that's about this size of a buff. Actually, this one's probably actually slightly bigger. I guess that damage can crit, but whatever. You know, this is not a tiny buff. Like, this does matter. Again, you max it first. You are getting 5 extra auto attack damage at level 9, which is honestly not bad at all. Like, this will move the win rate. Teemo will probably be an overall over 50% win rate pick, but Teemo is still like such a you know, counter-picked and counter-pickable and counter-picking champion that I don't think this ever moves the needle there. But if your opponents aren't going to be counter-picking you very well, you know, obviously it'll move some of the matchups around, and maybe he survives some of the fights against like Maokai a bit better, and you know, it improves. Either way, yeah, Teemo's still Teemo. He's gonna be a good champ. Just, you know, counterpick Camille's and things like that, and you'll be happy. Next up is Thresh. Now, I spent some time looking at stuff because I saw in Pro Play over the weekend, and I'd already seen this was starting to happen, but I didn't know how widespread it was. But in Dignitas versus 100 Thieves, Afterme was playing W Max Thresh. And I went and looked at some information in high elo on 11.6 solo queue. And what I found interesting was the higher elo you went, the more likely you were to max W. So if you looked at like Plat and lower, Qmax into Emax, I believe, was the more common build. Qmax into Wmax was more common in like Diamond Plus. And in all those elos as well, like Diamond and lower, had a higher win rate as well. Because, yeah, obviously maxing Lantern is, you know, better. Now, what was interesting is in both Plat Plus and Diamond Plus, Wmax first was like the fringe, like third picked build, but like a much higher win rate than maxing his hook, his Q, the death sentence. If you looked at just Masters Plus, the win rate, the pick rates got very, very, very close together to where Wmax first was like the same pick rate as like the second most common Q max build, right? So like people are still doing like Q into W, but Q into E was the same pick rate as W into Q, or like W into E, I forget which one. So like basically what I'm saying is, as elo rose, players were more likely to max W even first, to where like it was almost the second most popular skill order for Thresh in Masters Plus. But it's also worth noting that like even in Masters Plus, it was still not the first or second most popular build. Okay. Of also note, if you looked at Masters Plus, it also stopped being the highest win rate build to go W max first. That like this actually lines up as well when you think back earlier to like the Amumu stuff, right? When we looked at Diamond Plus Amumu, Q second took over as a higher win rate and higher pick rate. Well, it was already a higher pick rate, but it took over as a higher win rate build. As you go up in elos and Thresh, Lantern maxing, despite being more popular, was less of a better choice than just Q maxing as you expected to, which I found very surprising. I did not expect the win rate. And by the way, like Thresh is so popular that there is absolutely enough games for Master plus Thresh to have 3 different skill orders have enough sample to be like, yeah, we're cool, right? Because like Thresh is so popular that a 30% pick rate build has more games than like most supports. Like, to be really clear, right? Thresh is that popular that his 3rd most popular build has more games than most other supports. So if you're like, hey, is Annie support good in Master Plus? You should be less what's the word? Wow, my brain's not giving me the word. Like happy, reliable, concerned, confident. Oh my gosh, my brain is going away. You should be less confident in Masters Plus Annie games, period, than you should in Lantern Max Masters Plus Thresh games. I just find that really compelling as like, that's interesting to me, right? So I wanted to like spend time sharing that. I'm sorry if this went too long. But yeah, the win rate goes down with higher elo. So what's also interesting, to do one final conclusion, is if we take that data at face value and we assume there's no biases, and there totally might be, better players are sabotaging their win rates. As they're like, I had the secret tech. Wait, no, I'm too good for this tech. I can land hooks. And I find that really funny. I think a lot of that, by the way, to do one final thing, is you waste Lantern a lot more. Like, I think you waste Lantern a lot more in lower elo. And so getting just like, F it, here's a big shield. And like, oh, the Lantern's back up. Here you go. Here's like, because you kind of can't miss Lantern. And if you do miss Lantern, at least you get a shield to make that fight better. And so just like, YOLO, I'm Thresh, I just threw abilities out. Works when you're just like mashing your hands in the keyboard and you don't have any mechanics. I will say, like, having played a couple of times with like Challengers Threshes, that champ is the most night and day champ I've ever seen in my life, where it's like a Challenger Thresh like hits every hook I've ever seen, and the Lantern's always perfect every time, and like, this Thresh is actually 1v2ing the lane. I just have to like I just have to have hands, and like this lane is free. And then I play with like a random like gold 1 support player, and I'm like, I just have to tell you, just play for Lantern here. Just play back there. I'm gonna get a turret plate. Just don't hook. We're good. It's just funny how whereas like Zyra just like throws out his plant and it's fine no matter what. Anyway, let's move on. Lantern is losing a lot of its skill priority. Yeah, he's been doing really well in Pro and Elite. They've been finding success maxing Lantern 2nd, so we're cranking that one down a notch. Yes, indeed. That is pretty much accurate. Worth noting, Lantern 1st is also a thing. With this change, by the way, Lantern 1st is going away. Now that we're finally staying on the change itself, we've spent our 10 minutes on this change that would, that was my tangent for the video. Maybe there's more, who knows? But 40 second or 40 shield off of W, that is a really, really, really big deal. So yes, indeed. Oh, I forgot one more thing. Sorry about, now that we're going back to Teemo, I remember doing this a while ago and I forgot about it. So this is the full damage on an E plus an auto attack right here, right? So it's still 1 to 5 damage, but if you auto summon exactly once and just go and then walk away, 280 damage, or even 275, right? But like, I mean, even here, right? When's the last time you were punished by an auto attack for 244 damage? This is so much. Now, sure, it is the ability that you max first. This is literally a max rank ability. Of course it is 240. Also, hey, by the way, if you attack a second time, it's no longer 240 per ability, right? You cut the damage in half by attacking a second time, more or less. That's not exactly true, but, half, like literally half the damage though, right? Like, keep in mind, if we compare these numbers right here, half of the damage of E auto is in the dot, right? Like straight up half the damage, right? 124 became 244, 129 becomes 249. So even I guess a bit less than half the damage comes from the dot, but right, it's worth pointing out that, if Teemo only hits you once every 5 seconds, he is getting full value of the E. If he is full DPSing you, it's not nearly as harsh. Now, the one final thing is we can do even more math here. What is Teemo's base AD? What is his total attack speed at every level? And what is the DPS of E at every point in time? And so as Teemo gains functional attack speed by leveling up, and obviously more flat E damage from the rank up, hey, Teemo's straight up auto attack DPS of just I'm hitting you is 139 DPS at level 9. Just like, thought that was interesting, right? 139 DPS, considering his autos do 129. He's not yet attacking once per second. But, you can kind of, judge this one in your head, like, 20, 30, 40% of the, like, DPS is in the burn. Probably not 40. Probably 20, 25% of the DPS is in the burn. And about 70 to 80% of the damage is in the chain auto attacks. So, FYI. Just wanted to do some extra math because it's fun. So yeah, the Thresh nerf. If you are in fact maxing W second, you're going to feel it from level 8 onward. This does not change his landing phase in almost any meaningful way. But if you are going to max W second, bam, you feel all of it by level 13. This might push him back to E second, make him more of an offensive choice, less of a defensive choice. They'll move some builds around for sure. Alrighty, we go up to Tristana, who has indeed done incredibly well. Oh, and Thresh, by the way, over 1% win rate over baseline. Ban rate's fine, 15, 25%. Pro presence, highest of all supports at 91%. So yeah, makes sense there. Tristana, solid, almost the same spot as Thresh, by the way. Like solid 1% over baseline for win rate. 18 to 21% ban rate is, fine, acceptable. 87% pro presence. The fact that she's a flex pick also can be pretty dangerous. But yep, she's doing really, really well in pro play. So just, overall nerf the Trist. And yep, 2 AD off. Here you go. There's the change. Should knock her down a little bit, right? So we have Kaisa nerfs, we have Tristana nerfs, we have Ashe buffs, we have Varus buffs. Change the meta around a little bit. I'm fine with that completely. I don't believe this will be the patch for MSI. It'll be 11.8 will be the MSI patch. So Riot has no way of knowing how good these pro focus changes are. They're just going to kind of look at how much they affected solo queue and then hope that they're right. There may be a set of pro focus changes in 11.8 based on 11.6 playoffs, but this is probably the last Trist change we're going to see until after MSI. Udyr also losing to AD. Ultimately, is going to nerf his jungle clear a very little bit. We had the Phoenix aura damage a while back. We had his health scaling a little while back. Udyr is probably still going to get through 6 camps and be ready for Scuttle on time. As long as that's possible for Udyr, this doesn't really change that much. But again, 2 AD matters. Keep in mind he's using Tiger Stance for his first camp, and every single target camp. And every part of the clear anyway. He's doing Tiger, Phoenix every game, and then probably Bear at 4 is almost every skill order every time. So he's using Tiger at least once in every single camp. He's auto attacking 12 times at every single camp. Tiger's damage is total AD based. Like this does more than someone like say, I'll just say Sinjao or Viego, where they auto attack, but they also have spell damage. Like Viego's Q passive and whatever else. Udyr has spell damage, but his Q spell damage looks up his base AD. It looks up his total AD. So this has some bigger knock-on effects compared to doing this to Leah or something, right? Will it nerf Udyr out of pro play? Not at all. But Udyr's solo queue win rate, it's at 1.7%, 1.8% around there above baseline. The ban rate is 40%. The pro play presence is 90%. This nerf is probably not big enough to push Udyr off. Udyr will still be an above average champion. If you are an Udyr enjoyer in solo queue, you will still be successful with Udyr in solo queue. If you want to play Udyr in pro play, you'll still be successful with Udyr in pro play. Now that said, this is a pretty small nerf, just like the Hecarim change, because Turbo Chem Tank is getting changed. I would argue it's a nerf, which still should probably not knock these champions off. I don't think the nerf is big enough to knock these champs off, but those two combined probably take this champion and Hecarim off of the 1 and 2 spot in pro play. That might not be true, but I think it'll be true. Next up is Varus getting 0.4 attack damage growth. Varus, being a ranged champion, is more easily able to use AD than someone like Darius or Urgot, Urgot's ranged, Darius or Volibear. Not counting, jungling in and of itself being obviously pretty good. But yes, Varus is in fact underperforming to the tune of a pretty solid 1.5% almost. He's definitely on the weak side, definitely does need the help. 0.4 AD growth is pretty good. Realistically, that's actually a pretty meaningful amount of extra attack damage. Here is his total AD, his base AD before and after. It's up to about 7 increased attack damage at level 18. That's pretty good. Looking at his most common build being, I believe, let's see, what is the level 13 count? +4, yeah. So the most common skill order for Varus is W max last, because the Regum setup just isn't quite that good for AD Varus. I believe the most successful build is also QE max, so it's really not the build. This probably doesn't change that. Yes, the more raw AD you have, you probably are a bit incentivized to go for an on-hit build. So, like, this slightly incentivizes W second, but it's probably not going to happen. Either way, if you're putting points in a W, I mean, you're obviously putting 1 point in and you're still, likely maxing it last. Here's the, total on-hit damage difference. The percentages don't change very much, obviously. That's fine. The one last thing to point out, though, is Varus's Q is a total AD ratio. So this, in fact, does buff Varus Q damage, which, of course, also buffs lethality Varus, right? E does not have a total ratio. That one's a bonus ratio. I kind of don't like the inconsistency. I like total AD ratios a lot in general, by the way. You can't always use them, but I think they're good mechanics. Whatever. Yeah, it's a pretty nominal buff to Varus. Again, the fact that the growth actually affects one of his primary abilities is meaningful. This does matter quite a bit because a lot of the Q damage is in the total AD ratio and not that much in the base damage. This has a fairly meaningful damage increase. Varus is probably going to be in a pretty good spot. It's probably still lethality Varus, to be fair. I'm sorry for on-hit Varus players. I don't think he's quite there yet. He's like slightly below average. Like, he's in the realm of playable, to be clear. Like, I don't think this champ is dog poop. He's just, slightly on the weak side after this patch for on-hit Varus. I think he is roughly balanced post-patch for lethality Varus and like a completely viable option. 9% pro presence, that should rise quite a bit. Varus should absolutely be in the running in pro. We should be seeing some Varus at MSI. Next up is Yasuo getting 0.8 AD growth. Now, what's interesting, Yasuo's win rate is in fact below Varus's. So if Varus is, basically Yasuo's win rate is like 0.4, 0.5% lower than Varus. The AD growth buff is obviously like twice as large, right? Instead of plus 0.4 is plus 0.8. That said, Yasuo's maybe a bit of an exception, but in general, melee champions cannot use attack damage quite as easily as ranged champions because they don't have as many opportunities to attack. Now, obviously, Yasuo, being Yasuo, he's auto-attacking a lot more. The base AD filters into the Q, so he's much like Varus, has an ability that uses this number as well. In a lot of cases, Yasuo is getting a lot of bonus attack damage through his builds, and the fact that he's probably building 3 crit items and still getting like AD out of that as well, and getting pretty high AD counts overall as a result. End of the day, yeah, this is a pretty meaningful buff. Obviously, this is a lot of AD growth. I expect Yasuo to be in a totally good spot next patch. Yasuo feels like he's gonna be completely viable in solo queue. No pro play presence whatsoever, but who cares? That's fine. Yona gets some play. Yasuo with knockup synergy could get some play. There's a big enough buff to where, like, if you're already a Yone team, there's a good chance you could be a Yasuo team as well and try to add this champion in. This buff is big enough that, like, there's a good chance we see him in pro. Next up are Yorick buffs. I know that some people saw tentative changes when Mark Yetter posted about them on Twitter like a week or so ago. Ultimately, I actually kind of like the piecemeal approach. And the biggest one is these first two anyway. So marked champions and large monsters now continually awaken nearby graves. So if you didn't happen to have 4 ghouls ready, the E will spawn ghouls, and as ghouls die, if they're still slowed by the E, they'll spawn new ones. And that's a pretty big deal. Now, I don't know if, like, so the other thing that happens, right, if you have 4 ghouls out and you land E, your ghouls all leap at the target, and that's some damage, and that feels pretty good. Now, it's 200% damage when they leap, and that's a pretty big deal. Also, by the way, affects jungle monsters, which is also obviously quite meaningful. What I don't know is if you land E and your ghouls all leap at a homie, right? And the turret kills one, and because of the other line, it spawns a new 5th ghoul, or 4th ghoul because one died, does that one immediately then also leap and deal 200% damage? Because if so, that is a huge damage increase, and this could be a really, really, really big deal. Now, Yorick is okay-ish. It's like under 1% sub baseline. It's not a horrible win rate. It's not great, obviously. Deserving of buffs, absolutely, but like not complete crap. This feels like a very, very big buff. And then there's, of course, the cast paradigm thing where she's going to cast at max range, which I think is just a good thing for all these abilities. I hate walk-up spells, so I think this is a good thing. This feels really big, though. This honestly feels really, really big. I expect Yorick to gain a lot here. Yeah, I mean, we might be in a Yorick meta. We'll see. If this guy gets like 5% win rate, by the way, off the patch, there's probably a hotfix nerf somewhere. Essence Reaver is getting 100 gold cheaper, but losing 10 attack damage. Now, 10 attack damage is worth 350 gold, which means this is a nerf to Essence Reaver. So here we go. Oh yeah, here's Yasuo's attack damage, by the way. Pretty meaningful gain. All right, here we are with Essence Reaver. This item was very, very, very efficient, plus had Spellblade, which, by the way, actually we can, do that real quick. There we go. Obviously, Sheen is worth 700 gold or so. This item is very, very, very efficient. You might argue that, the Sheen proc, isn't worth 700 gold. Debatable, I suppose, but I mean, this item without Sheen was just stat efficient. Like, they definitely buffed the crap out of this. Like, here we are with this as well. I mean, still a very 100 gold cheaper but less attack damage. Yeah, these numbers are accurate. Yeah, you were buying this first on a lot of champions. It was mandatory second on a lot of champions. I didn't really feel like it was completely squashing item choices. I'm not sure, but apparently, yeah, it is apparently outperforming amongst his peers in the class and then some. So that's fair. Yeah, I mean, if it's crushing everything else, which to be fair, like, there are basically no marksman non-mythics you don't rush. Or sorry, there are no marksman non-mythics that you rush except Essence Reaver and maybe Manamune. Which, like, I don't hate the idea of, look, there are non-mythics you can rush. Like, I think that's actually very defensible. Like, just through that lens. But, like, I also understand the idea of it's so overtuned, it's the only legendary you even remotely consider here. And if every legendary was the same tier, like, same power level as Essence Reaver, then you just wouldn't buy a mythic, and that feels bad. Like, mythics are meant to be a bit OP. Like, so that you're excited about getting one of the, 3 or 4 or 5 that you can buy in your class. So I buy that. Essence Reaver, honestly, still very good. The fact that it's actually even cheaper also is pretty reasonable. I still kind of subscribe to the idea of I would really like AD carry legendaries to cost the same amount of gold. This pushes it more towards the Zeal upgrades like Hurricane and Phantom Dancer and like Mortal Reminder and whatnot. But I really wish Riot would pick a cost profile and stick to it for marksman legendaries. I actually really would like that, with exceptions for things like Infinity Edge and real considerations like a Mortal Reminder and Lord Dominic's, which are sort of reactive situational buys and not like generic core build items. But for things like Essence Reaver or like Navori Quick Blades and Hurricane and Rapid Fire Cannon and things like that, I would love a consistent stat profile across them. I think that would be a good thing for AD carry, like, item decision making, because the items would feel much more comparable. That is what I would do. Let's move on, though. Essence Reaver, honestly, should still be a very good item. Next up, we have Everfrost. Everfrost, definitely in the buffs on 11.4, was doing too well. So the cooldown is up by 10 seconds from 20 to 30, and the damage is down pretty substantially. Now, if I recall correctly, I didn't look it up, that's my bad, the base damage and AP ratios on virtually all of the other mage mythics is like 115 plus 15%, I want to say. I don't remember exactly, but like and maybe that's not quite right. Like, some items need to have a higher base damage than others, but I find it very strange that Everfrost has a much higher AP ratio than the other AP mythics, if I recall correctly. That part feels a little odd to me. I'm glad the ratio is getting nerfed down a little bit, but and also I think the idea of you don't buy Everfrost because the base damage is the highest is also a good change. That said, again, the ratio is so much higher that it still has the highest base damage. Feels kind of strange when, like, Ludens and Night Harvester, like, their actual shtick is they do a bunch of damage on hit and they don't do anything else. Like, yeah, they give move speed, but whatever. Everfrost is like, no, my shtick is I root you. And Protobelt's like, yeah, I dash forwards. Also, we do the most damage. Like, I realize it's not as reliable because it's a skill shot and stuff, but, like, right? But if you're, yeah, I mean, yeah, this just feels odd that the damage is higher than things like Ludens. When the point of Everfrost is the root, not the burst, but it's the burst. I mean, a 0.3 AP ratio is, like, not bad. That is very high for an item. To be clear, right? This is almost Lichbane levels of AP ratio on hit. Like, this is basically Lichbane. That's kind of absurd. The cooldown going up. Yep, sure, big deal here. So here's Everfrost. Definitely gold efficient. Obviously, some of this gold efficiency is in mana, so hey, keep that in mind. It's actually 3,000 gold worth of stats for 3,400. But hey, you're getting a really good active. You're getting a very good mythic passive, in general. So, yep, seems like a good item still. And by the way, this is with the AP of the item filtered in. This item automatically did 153 damage baseline no matter what. Now it does 124 base damage no matter what, which is about where Luden's Echo lives on first item. But again, this ratio is much higher, so I dislike the ratio. Oh well. Next up is Lord Dominic's Regards. Now I talked about the fact that I would like AD carry items to cost, items in a class really to cost just the same amount, 3,000 gold. Lord Dominic's would be a reasonable exception, although with Last Whisper existing as Last Whisper, it feels a bit more reasonable. That said, Lord Dominic's definitely overall too good, and so it's 100 gold more expensive, and it has 5 less attack damage, so a double nerf here to the item. It was definitely becoming a go-to second purchase on anyone who wasn't immediately in love with Phantom Dancer. You realistically only had a couple of okay options. You went Collector on a couple if you're going to be a lethality backline burster like Kaisa, maybe MF in some cases. You went Phantom Dancer if you are just a Supreme Auto Attacker, which is a great Tristana item, and otherwise you would have to go Lord Dominic's. And there were realistically no other options. Yeah, kinda Essence Reaver, sorta, kinda, but again, that's getting nerfed as well. So it's options were a little squashed. And look, in general, I'm kind of okay with your second item being all right, you're going Collector, or you're going PD, or you're going Reaver, and those are the three kind of big obvious ones. That's fine because they're kind of headliners for the playstyle, right? It's the lethality execute item, it's the best auto attack, single target damage item, it's the the best cooldown reduction item. I'm sorry, Quick Blades, your item sucks. At least those make sense in that they do a thing. But when you're just default tank busting on second item, which is supposed to scale off the amount of armor your opponents buy, the amount of health your opponents buy, and it's no, I buy it second before they built any of that. It's this item is overtuned. Lord Dominic's kind of needs to fight for the third slot. Because to be clear, this line of text and this line of text are very, very, very good lines of text. And against the right target, that does more than Infinity Edge does. And I think it's totally reasonable for Lord Dominic's to fight Infinity Edge for the third item slot. I think that is a reasonable spot for this item to live, because IE is the best generic damage you can get for the slot, and Lord Dominic's is going to be the best tank busting damage you can get for the slot. And deciding third, once you've built your core 2 items because of your champion, I am Kaisa, I'm doing Gale Force Collector. That's my big build. I'm Zaya, and I went Kraken Slayer, Essence Reaver. Probably not PD. I'm Trist, and I went Kraken Slayer or Gale Force and Phantom Dancer. Okay, I built my core items. I'm ready to go. There's a bit of room for movement, but those are the kind of the things that I really want to look for. Okay, it's time for third slot. Am I tank busting or am I generic? Or did I really, really have to go healing cut for some reason? And honestly, there was room in the second slot to have gone for shield cut. And even second for Immortal as well. But that pacing feels good. There's still no other way to get 35% armor pen and a 15% damage amp against tanks. Lord Dominic's will still be a very, very, very good item post-patch. But it is not the auto-include second, which is good. That feels very appropriate here. So fan of the change overall. Cool beans. Sorolda's Grudge. Yeah, this is one thing I also feel kind of bad about. Maybe this is an intentional design decision, and this is somewhat defensible if it is, although I think this is done more elegantly in other places. Why was there a 500 gold difference between AD carries getting tank busting and fighters getting tank busting? Isn't the entire point of Juggernauts the fact that, right, sure, Sorolda, Juggernauts / Assassins, I guess Juggernaut's supposed to go Black Cleaver, to be fair, but, I guess if they're saying, look, Assassins aren't allowed to tank bust, your tank busting sucks. I can sort of buy that, I guess. I don't love it. I don't know. Either way, yeah, is whatever. I'm not going to opine on this too much. It doesn't really matter. 200 gold off of Cyrilda's is pretty meaningful. Here is Cyrilda's before and after, and oh boy. Yeah, Cyrilda's was not like, I mean, look at Lord Dominic's, right? Look at even after the nerf, okay? Assuming you actually want the crit chance, which, okay, sure, maybe you can debate that. But, like, this was gold efficient and had Giant Slayer. I mean, and before it was like 112% gold efficient, had Giant Slayer. This was not gold efficient, and I mean, you could argue Bitter Cold is better than Giant Slayer. I'm not sure it's a good faith argument. I would probably just take 15% damage amp, but, you know, maybe. Whatever, it's debatable. But yeah, now we're in a spot where like, oh, look, both items are 103-ish% gold efficient. This feels pretty reasonable. This seems pretty good. Yeah, it's more expensive, but I'm also getting more stats here. It also honestly puts to the part where it's like, look, if I really don't need to crit that much, I mean, I'm paying, 200 more gold, which is not that bad. I'm getting pretty close armor pen, and I'm getting 15 more AD and 20 haste. It is a reasonable decision to be like, you know what? On Jhin, screw it, Cyrilda's, why not? Now, sure, the W already roots, the R already slows, maybe you don't do it, but there's a case to be made. And I'm a fan of this, right? I'm a fan of this item not being so garbage that you could make a real choice here. Cool, yeah, 200 gold, that's within reason to make a choice here, right? 500 gold, not within reason for kind of the same item. In terms of like opening it up to like marksman for other options and whatnot. So yeah, that looks pretty good. Cool beans. Next up, Trinity Force is getting sharpened a little bit there to have a more obvious sort of place to live. It was very attack speed heavy, so it's getting more AD, less attack speed, other stuff, and you now get the percent base AD off of hitting towers. So here is Trinity Force before and after the change. Basically, it was indeed quite gold efficient, considering that Spellblade is, a real like costed item. If you really want to get rid of these numbers, then I guess this is 2,800 gold worth of stats for 33. But, I mean, considering you probably should expect Spellblade to be worth something. Either way, the stat profile goes up, right? 5 AD is worth more than 5 attack speed here. It is, again, I would argue, harder for melee champs to auto-attack than other kinds of champions. But it's reasonably easy to use spells, right? Like, a Darius is going to have a fairly hard time using 35% attack speed because it's going to be hard to get 3 autos off. Obviously, he wants to get 3 autos off because he wants to get the 5 stack for the passive, for the ult. But also, like, you could just take 5 AD and feel good about that everywhere. I know Darius really does use attack speed for, like, his stat shards, and he actually has attack speed, like, again, because you want the 5-stack passive, Darius is kind of a bad example. Okay, we'll move on. Stridebreaker attack speed's useful in him as well, so we'll really move on. But yeah, Trinity Force was very, very auto-attack focused. I mean, you look at Threefold Strike, and it's like, yeah, I really want to auto-attack 5 times to get the full benefit of this item. And, like, it's just hard as a fighter to auto-attack 5 times. Like, if I'm Jax and I'm autoing, like, a Caitlyn 5 times, she's probably already dead. Who cares? Like, I'm just jumping in with Q damage, autoing once, getting my E stun, getting my W reset, and then, I'm just 1 auto away from my ult slapping, and that's 1,400 damage. Like, that's my combat pattern. I'm not autoing a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th time. So this buffing on turrets is a big deal, right? This is a very, very big deal to make top lane split push better. And this seems to be something that's happening. Top lane is becoming less popular. Top lane is increasingly, I would say, less played around in pro play. There's a few teams who do it, but like, there's not a lot of top lane, win game champs in pro. Top lane, win game is not really happening in solo queue either. I think top lane could use some help, and so here's a good buff to a top lane fighter item. The fact that it kills turrets faster is a great change. I'm a fan of that one. I think the Mythic passive technically is less gold efficient, but this is where gold efficiency, once again, can lie to you, because I would argue 3 flat AD, 3 flat move speed, and 3 flat ability haste are honestly just better than 10% attack speed. Despite the gold value of those being lower, this is a better Mythic passive because it is hard to use that attack speed in a lot of these cases. Trinity Force is definitively a much stronger item and should absolutely turn some heads. It doesn't look that flashy of a change. Seeing 5 AD for 5 attack speed, I don't know, maybe it is, right? The fact there's 4 lines of text, This should turn some heads. There should be several new Triforce users. This should feel pretty good, I think. Should really be looking forward to this one. For funsies, by the way, I went and compared to the other fighter mythics because I was curious, right? Like, looking at the stat profile and everything else. And it's like, look at Divine Thunder, the other Spellblade item. And it's also 4,000% gold, or 400 gold, efficient, basically. 122%, basically the same, right? We can even look at, the post-patch version. And this is, by the way, underselling the Spellblade at just 1.5x Spellblade, because it could be higher because of 10% max HP. It's higher because there's a heal attached to it as well. But it's like, oh yeah, we get raw AD, haste, and health. And it's like, oh, I got AD, haste, health, and some attack speed. And yeah, maybe the attack speed is going to work out in the end and be useful. But it's like, this is just 3,000 gold straight up of stats. And this is, under that. Right? This is just less pure stats. As Trinity Force. And Trinity Force is kind of the stat stick of an item. I guess it's down in threefold strike, which, to be fair, you can't really undersell. 25 MS is good. And, 6 to 30 to 45 more base AD is very good. You can't really undersell this, but I kind of don't like the item with 7 lines of text, I guess is all I'm really trying to say ultimately. Is I feel like it's slightly hard to properly value Trinity Force when it literally does 8 things. Right? It has 5 core stats, it has move speed on hit, it has attack damage on hit, and it has a mythic passive. Yeah, sure, they all have mythic passives, sure, whatever. But this is kind of a lot of text. And I know that's kind of the thing with Trinity Force, it does a million things, but it's almost too unfocused. Maybe that's wrong of me, but that's not true. But I don't know. It's almost too unfocused. I'm not sure though. Gore Drinker, by the way, also has 7 lines of text. Stridebreaker has 7 lines of text. This I don't know. This feels a little strange to me. When the idea of mythics, I was a really big fan of. And I don't mind stats shifting around somewhat. I like how Turbo Chem Tank and Sunfire Aegis work, where it's okay, Aegis is more expensive because it's the more selfish tank item, but it does more damage. And, Aegis and Frostfire Gauntlet have the exact same stats, exact same cost, and Sunfire's stats are very similar as well. But you're really comparing mythic passives, and these are reasonable choices to make and feels good. Here, it's I understand they are trying to serve different champions. But it's just weird that, Stridebreaker has attack speed, and also Gordrigger has attack speed, just only when you're low. They all have AD, haste, and health. That's great. Here's AD and haste and health. Here's AD and haste and health. And to be fair, that's good, right? I'm glad these are all the 3 same numbers. And look, they all have 2 or 400 health. Basically, it's Divine Thunder and Gore Drinker. The tanky options have 400. And their attack damage is 30 to 45 in all cases. Those are reasonably close. But it's wait, Trinity Force, the high damage one, has less AD than Stridebreaker, but I want to deal damage with Trinity Force because the auto attack one, I guess the attack speed's higher, but the AD is lower. But then once I attack, then my attack damage is higher. Oh, also Trinity Force gives this movement speed chase, but it's only 25 move speed and only when I auto attack, whereas Stridebreaker is 30 move speed and it's any physical damage. And it's just I feel the Marksman Mythics do such a better job of look, we are very clearly progressing in terms of offensive intent. And so the more offensive the item is, the more attack speed and AD it has. And then here's Shield Bolt over here with the least damage, but it's got the shield passive. And I get that. It doesn't, Shield Bolt doesn't have more AD and attack speed than Kraken Slayer. Okay, it eventually has more AD because of the mythic passive, but Kraken Slayer gets so much attack speed and has so much raw AD that it's never close, right? You always know Kraken Slayer does more. Stridebreaker comes with more speed than Triforce. It chases better than Triforce. It comes with more AD than Triforce. It comes with more stat efficiency, arguably, than Triforce. You're always gonna move faster. 3% is better than 3 flat. 30 is better than 25 flat. At some point, threefold strike beats the 15 base AD. I don't know when to say that 10% attack speed is better than 15 AD, counting threefold strike. Okay, Spellblade versus Halting Slash, sure, right? Like those are like actual comparisons. I'm not gonna like complain about those, but I really do dislike the like awkwardly non-normalized stat profiles. Gore Drinker, like at least having health regen makes sense from an item perspective. Like this is the sustain item. Like it's going to keep you alive longer. It also has the most AD of all the items. They keep you alive longer. One of the most health and the health regen and the healing, and is the most damaging one. Like it literally has the most damage, right? Thirsting Slash is 100% total AD, which by the way is not base AD. So as soon as I have like any items at all, Thirsting Slash literally deals more damage than Spellblade. Yes, the cooldown's much lower, right? Like, to be clear, at a certain point, like, Thirsting Slash is clearly, I hit it once per fight, maybe twice if I'm lucky. Spellblade is hit several times per fight. Like, this is actually apples to oranges. You can compare fruit. A lower cooldown is relevant. I'm not saying Spellblade is actually worse than Thirsting Slash. That's kind of fine. But, like, is Gore Drinker really the bursty item? Is that the identity of Gore Drinker? No? Then why is the AD and active the highest of all the items? I don't know. It's a sustain one with the most AD and some health regen. Like, right, this makes sense, and that makes sense, and that makes sense, and that makes sense, and that makes sense. Highest base AD, by the way. Highest base damage ability, by the way. Attack speed 1 year low, because, I don't know, you needed to compete with the other attack speed items with your bursty tank item. I understand the idea of I want something, like, I want a way of, like, I want to fight better as I get lower, right? The Olaf Tryndamere Berserker idea, like, I buy that. I do. It just, why is it attack speed? I don't know. I don't know. It's just, like, these are little minor niggling things that it makes the items harder to compare. Like, to me, the entire idea of Mythics from the very first place was that they were easy to compare. I thought Mage Mythics did a good job of this one for the most part. I'm still a little sad about Mana Mythics, but I think it's generally okay. I think Marksman Mythics does an outstanding job of this one. I think Tank Mythics do a great job of this one. I think Support Mythics, the pool of chance is so wide, I think it was tough from the start. And to be fair, fighters are maybe in a similar boat where it's like, look, the pool of what fighters might need is so varied, it's tough to find the right set of stats. I might actually buy that. Like, supports and fighters are probably the most varied of a class out there. I think that's actually fairly reasonable and a fairly acceptable idea. But, like, so are mages, and Mage Mythics lined it up in a, I would say, fairly good spot in terms of being easy comparison. Like, if I'll do a dumb fruit metaphor because I love dumb metaphors. All right? If you're comparing apples to oranges in Mage Mythics, like, at least they're both, like, sweet fruit that you make jam out of sometimes. Trying to compare fighter mythics is like comparing apples to tomatoes. They're technically fruit, but they're used for nothing similar at all. I guess except juice. That's like the one thing. And I think that makes the comparison pretty apt. Right? Mage mythics are apples to oranges. And it's a pretty good comparison. Do you want to eat an apple or an orange? Fighter mythics are apples to tomatoes. They might look the same on the outside a little bit. They're really, really different. I don't know. We're moving on. That's going to be the top comment. So I'm assuming about apples, tomatoes. Who cares? Let's advance. So Turbo Chem Tank is getting 15% less move speed and a 10% greater slow. I expect this to be a nerf to the item, mostly because so many times if you are a tank and you are, like, turboing up to somebody, that's fine. It's a good item. Okay, but you are probably landing a stun with this. So your slow is not that meaningful because you're landing a slow and just bear slapping them anyway. So for a significant portion of the slow's duration, they're already bear stunned and it doesn't matter. Or they're hit with a Mundo Cleaver, or they've been feared by Hecarim, or galloped backwards by Hecarim, or whatever, right? So many tanks, and actually, so I want to be clear, I'm a really big fan of this, right? So I am always a fan of incentivizing sort of off-meta ideas of builds. So, like, what if, now this, you might immediately hate this, but I'm going to say it anyway. What if there is a viable Turbo Chem Tank Fiora build? Now, you might hate this immediately because you already hate Fiora and the idea just sounds horrible to you. But, like, what if it was, like, reasonably choosable, right? So compare the idea that, like, some marksmen can reasonably use assassin mythics. So right now, for example, by the way, Lethality Sivir is the best performing Sivir build. It is our most popular build. It's getting about like a 20% of Sivir's play rate in Pro is Lethality Sivir. It's the best in solo queue. It might not be the best in all pro situations, but like it is clearly viable in a lot of situations because it works. The idea that Marksman can use Assassin Mythics so that Jhin and Misfortune can play a more caster-based style and use Assassin Mythics, like that to me feels like a positive. If fighters and non-hard tanks can reliably use Chem Tank, like you're gonna hate this as well, but like what if Darius or Garen were like allowed to reliably use Chem Tank because they, instead of Stride Breaker, they can go Chem Tank and close the gap and have a big supercharged slow because Garen has no CC on his kit whatsoever aside from the silence on Q. And it's the idea of like, okay, I know Stridebreaker has his own slow, sure, but like, the idea of going Chem Tank on a like medium-sized fighter to be like, well, we really, really, really need engage. So I'm going to go Chem Tank Urgot because we just need some way in and we don't have one and it's got to be me. Like someone like Braum going Chem Tank and it's like, look, I wouldn't normally go Chem Tank here. I wouldn't normally be engaged, but like, wow, we need something. And he's like, screw it. I'm going to jump to my Fiora. I'm going to Chem Tank. I'm going to run in there. And because my slow is 50%, it's actually enough lockdown that it matters. Like that's the point, right? Is like, it's not that hard for a melee champ to get into melee range in some way, but to let Chem Tank provide enough CC to be worth considering, that to me is interesting. So I'm a fan of that. I like this kind of idea of a change. Again, for the engaged tanks who already had the CC, they're not going to feel this as much. They're going to feel the move speed loss instead, and that's fine. But ultimately, one thing I will say though is Frostfire Gauntlet is much like Night Harvester, very underrated. I'm not saying, like Night Harvester, you should buy this in every game. I'm saying that neither one, you should buy that every game. But Frostfire Gauntlet is very, very good, is very underrepresented, and that item is quite nice. It turns out having a slow that is this good every like 4 seconds is really, really nice for the champs who do already have a way in. Maybe Frostfire slow could be increased a little bit more. Now, unfortunately, it means these items really, really overlap because they're both just providing a slow, and that's kind of scary. That unfortunately their output is so similar, and I now feel bad that Chem Tank's idea was the move speed and Frostfire's idea was the slow. Like, okay, I'll take another stab at this one. Maybe the better option actually is the slow is decreased. You like keep the move speed high, and it's like, yeah, Chem Tank gets you there, but don't worry. You've got Frostfire Gauntlet as the way of locking people down and keeping them in place. Maybe that one can get an increased slow. Maybe it doesn't need it. I don't know. All right, in-game shop updates. Cool stuff. Summoner's Rift rank progression, cleans ups. That's nice. Some bug fixes and QOL changes. The biggest one, by the way, is Seraphine no longer gets the Moonstone Renewer heal when she simply casts Q near teammates and puts notes on them. So I did a little bit of quick research. There's no visuals for this, but I looked at Seraphine's win rate with her 3 most common builds, and then Sona's win rates with her 2 most common builds. And what I did, by the way, is just like first item win rate, not like, first item win rate, right? So Seraphine's most common first 3 items were Moonstone, Imperial Mandate, and Liandry's Torment. Her win rate with Moonstone was only 0.7% higher than it was with Imperial Mandate. What this means is Seraphine has a very good second choice. To where if she was really being propped up, if the Moonstone build was really being propped up with Moonstone just being gigabusted on her specifically, that's okay. Because she's got an easy fallback pattern of a solid first item that was going to be fine. The Liandry's win rate, by the way, was a full 2% lower than her Imperial Mandate build. So it's like basically non-viable. So like AP damage Seraphine, not really the build. This is for support Seraphine. I didn't look at other roles because support's the most common. I looked at Sona as a comparison point. Like, what's the lift here for Sona? Sona's 2 most common builds are Moonstone number 1, and actually Luden's Tempest to play AP Sona as second. The win rate difference there was 4.4%. you should just always go Moonstone Sona. It's just her best build. Actually, not really true. Her like third or fourth most common, I didn't write it down, but I remembered it, is actually going Staff of Flowing Water, because she so reliably buffs everybody that giving everyone a bunch of AP and move speed is just like clearly absurdly good, and you just actually buy that every game. So Sona players, by the way, if you want free elo on Sona, by the way, go Staff of Flowing Water first and just gain MMR. It's gonna be absurd. Just do it. You'll win every game. If you wanna get your next rating really early, just do that. It's dumb. There's some free tips for you out there. Alrighty. End of the day. You can read the rest of the bug fixes yourself. We got skins. We are an hour and 19 minutes in. Let us TLDR patch 11.7. This is one patch for MSI. This should be an 11.8 for MSI. This should not affect any league's regional playoffs. We've got a bunch of nerfs for pro play and a bunch of buffs. Alistar losing 0 to 20 damage by level 9, and a flat 15 damage on trample is going to be a pretty meaningful cut to his early to mid-game bullying potential. Pretty strong, but overall a big pro play pick. Maybe the one you care about here is 1 second off tantrum cooldown. Very, very big clear speed increase. Maybe we should be very, very good. Ashe getting 0 to 20 seconds on the ult cooldown as a buff. Already in a decent spot. Ashe going to be a good champion. Braum getting 2 seconds on the E and 0, a quarter, and a half second on the R max knockup. Pretty solid. Braum should be in a pretty good spot. Hecarim losing up to 10% move speed on the charge. Coupled with a nerf to Turbo Chem Tank, Hecarim will still be overall on the strong side, but no longer the most picked jungler in pro play. Ivern is getting 0 to 20 off of the Trigger Seed damage. Still going to be an overall strong jungler. If you're an Ivern player, you're still going to be a strong Ivern player. Kai'Sa getting 20 to 0 seconds increased on the R. Kai'Sa will still be a top 2 bot laner in pro play. Won't be too far below 50% or baseline win rate in solo queue. Slightly on the weak side, but if you're a good Kai'Sa player, you're going to be fine. Shouldn't be a big deal. Kindred has about 2% win rate to spare in terms of buffs. Really needs them. 0.1 AD ratio on the Q, 2 seconds on the E. Pretty meaningful. Gets pretty close to balanced. Should be in a decent spot. Lissandra, already pretty strong. 10 flat damage on Q is a very big deal. Lissandra is going to be an outstanding, great mid laner next patch. May well see some pro play as well. Mordekaiser gets about a 7% damage increase on ISO Q. Is already in a decent spot. Mordekaiser is a very good top laner now. Maybe some scouted pro play. Rel, pretty meaningful nerf here. Probably drops her below the top 3. Probably below top 3 in pro play. There should be some champs replacing her. Still reasonably viable. Slightly suboptimal in solo queue, but should be okay. Teemo, already much of a counterpick champion. These buffs are pretty big. The big one being 1 to 5, though, on hit base damage on the E, which is quite meaningful. Teemo is still very, very counterpick heavy on both sides of the matchups. So obviously it's still a buff, right? But you still don't want to blind pick Teemo very much. Thresh is increasingly maxing W second and sometimes even first. This lowers that incentive quite a lot. W max second may still be the correct build, but it's a lot closer to E max second. Still, Thresh is in a very good spot. Shouldn't be a big problem. Tristana loses 2 flat AD. Slightly strong. Big pro play presence. Makes sense. Udyr loses 2 flat AD. Strong in solo queue. Big pro play presence. Probably still going to be a little bit overtuned. Even with the Chem Tank nerf, probably still a little bit strong. Tristana going to be still a little bit strong, I think, as well. Although pretty close to Tristana's side. Tristana's not going to be too egregious. Varus definitely on the weak side. 0.4 AD growth is pretty meaningful. Gets him pretty close to balanced. Should be in a good spot. Yasuo is 2% win rate below kind of acceptable or average. 0.8 AD growth gets you really close there. Yasuo should be in a pretty good spot. Yorick, now the E summons ghouls and not just the Q. And the ghouls now leap for double damage, which is a very big deal as well. This is a pretty big lift to Yorick. He should be in a very good spot. It's hard to know how big this buff's going to be. This could be gigabusted, could just be a little bit strong, but should be solid. One thing to point out, Yorick falls off hard in the late game. Yorick is an early mid-game champion who needs to end the game. Do not troll with Yorick. He will lose games that you were going to win for free that you're not going to win anymore because Yorick can't team fight for crap. Please try to find ways to close games out with Yorick on your team. Don't just int because you have a 6-0 Yorick pushing an inhibitor turret. You can't be the reason you lose, and as Yorick, don't be that either. Essence Reaver losing quite a bit of efficiency. 10 AD is worth 350 gold. This is getting 100 gold cheaper. Essence Reaver, pretty sizable nerf, but still a very good item. Everfrost, 25 and 0.05 off the AP ratio and takes off the cooldown. All pretty big Everfrost nerfs. The usability changes, though, were very good. Everfrost, I think, should still be a viable mage mythic. Solid spot overall. Lord Dominic's hopefully no longer built second on basically every marksman. This should honestly be a third or fourth pick. I think ideally designed should fight Infinity Edge or fight for your fourth item slot if you're gonna consider building like durability instead. So good that it's not as generically good, right? An AD nerf and a cost nerf means they're nerfing its generic power, which is correct. Sorrelto's 200 gold cheaper is now basically as an item the same efficiency, and you're basically paying the same amount of gold for the Giant Slayer portion or for the slow portion here. So these items are now pretty appropriately costed against one another. Good job. Trinity Force loses 5 attack speed, gains 5 AD, loses 10 attack speed mythic, and gains 3 AD, 3 move speed, 3 haste on the mythic passive. And Threefold Strike now stacks AD on towers. This is a pretty big change. Triforce has a lot more users now. Feels good. Turbo Chem Tank, 50% less move speed, 10% more slow. The slow is very often overwritten by other bits of CC in your kit, so it's not as meaningful as you might think. That said, pretty big nerf to Chem Tank. Should be nerfing Hecarim and Udyr quite a bit. Open up some more options. I do want to point out that I really believe Frostfire Gauntlet is better than you think. You should try it on a lot more champions. It's actually quite good. Shop updates, Summoner's Rift LP progression stuff, good changes, and then Seraphine no longer gets Moonstone off of like casting Q or E near an allied champion and buffing them with the notes. She has a very easy second best item in Imperial Mandate, so Seraphine should be fine, just might change her build, we'll see. That's it for the patch rundown. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.